And if you just want to request screen share.
Okay. Continue. You see that?
Yep.
Go to full screen, maybe. I see. Is it full screen for you?
Yes.
It is a
Okay.
full screen.
Okay, cool. All right, so I guess I'm supposed to start.
Yes, for some reason I lost my introduction slides. They disappeared from what I
that's
have going.
okay.
So if you just want to introduce yourself first briefly and tell
Okay.
us who you are, and then go ahead, that would be wonderful.
Okay, yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. Ron Pereira is my name, and I guess my official title is managing director here at Gamba Academy. So I'm one of the co-founders of the company. We started a company in March of 2009. So been at it for a little while now. And today we're going to talk about Toyota Kata. So it's a topic that I'm extremely personally passionate about. Funny story, I actually pretty good friends with Mike Rother. Mike Rother is the gentleman who coined the term Toyota Kata. He's an educator and a researcher, and he's one of the lean pioneers in our movement. If those are familiar with lean, know about things like value stream mapping. Well, he and another gentleman wrote a book that changed my life. It was called Learning to See, and it's about value stream mapping, and it's one of the original lean workbooks, and that's kind of what got me all fired up about all this lean stuff. And anyhow, Mike and many other folks there in the lean movement really got us going as a movement. That's the best word I can give it. And problem is we all copied all of like Toyota's all the things they were doing, all the artifacts, all the things we could see. We did their 5S and their Kanban and their Endon and their, you name it, companies were copying it, yet no one was really achieving the same results as Toyota. And so they were trying to figure out, what are we missing? And so what Mike and a group of researchers did is they went back and tried to understand what's really going on at companies like Toyota, not just Toyota. They're not the only ones that do this, but they went back and did a really deep dive into trying to understand sort of the things that were maybe harder to see, right? The underlying routines or the habits, if you will, that these folks were doing. And long story short, they came back and Mike wrote this book called Toyota Kata. The original Toyota Kata book is, Mike would be the first one to tell you, don't buy that one and read that one if you want to learn about Toyota Kata, because that's more about the research. He's since written many other books that are more digestible and they aren't just full of research. But anyhow, this Toyota Kata is what they figured out and coined the term Toyota Kata as the sort of the things that were happening, the way that these leaders were operating and thinking and leading their people. And so that's what this whole framework is all about. And what's funny is that I've told Mike this story when he first came out with the book Toyota Kata. I was kind of like, oh, well, good for Mike, he'll sell a bunch of books and do some talks and all the rest of it. Good for him. And I didn't really think too much about it. And then within Gamba Academy, we started getting customers saying, hey, do you have anything on Toyota Kata? And we were like, wow, no, it's PDCA, it's, practical problem solving. And we would try to sort of not dismiss it, but we didn't have anything to give them. So, we were trying to redirect them. And finally, we just kept getting so many requests for it. I said, well, we don't ever make content in our company if we don't practice something and aren't familiar with it. So I said, let me give this a fair crack. And so we started learning about it ourselves here at the company, and then we started practicing it. And man, it really blew me away. And I was like, man, where was this all the years where I was a young engineer running around? If I only knew this stuff back then, how much better I could have been. So that's why I'm so passionate about the topic is it is really a framework. And I dare to say it's if you're newer to continuous improvement, or even if you've been at it for a long time and you don't know the framework behind scientific thinking, you are really, really missing out. And I would beg you to, take what we're going to introduce tonight, but then go and learn more, read Mike's books. There's a whole conference dedicated to, and Leanne could tell you more about that as well, called Kata, which it's a smaller conference, but it's just full of passionate people who practice this. So anyhow, so that's just a little quick introduction, but let me just get into the actual slides. And the way I prefer to do this is it's hard doing it virtually, where I'm just like staring at a screen and I don't know if people are falling asleep. If you have questions or, aren't sure about something, please unmute your mic and just butt in. I would much rather that than just, a silent audience if you weren't understanding or getting something. So, but that said, what I want to begin with is sort of this basic conflict that we human beings have. And that is, as an adult, which we're all adults, our brains are optimized for performance. That's just how our brains are made. They're made for performance. And in fact, our brains are trying to help us be lazy in a way. They want us to be able to do things as easy as possible. That's why things like habits are so important, because once you get really good at something, you can do it without thinking, right? So these are really good things. It's a good thing that our brains are optimized for performance, because sometimes our survival depends on it. So if you're walking through the jungle, right, and you hear something over in the bush or something like that, well, you might want to be alert of what's going on, because it could save your life. Okay. In fact, if you think about driving a car, if our brains weren't optimized for performance, we would be in big trouble, right? Because if you think about driving, and I just, I've got some kids, older kids that have been driving for years, and I just have my 16-year-old son. God bless him. He just got his license, and let me just tell you, he has two older sisters, and my girls were much better drivers, let's just say, than my son was. And you just take it for granted, really, how difficult driving is when you've been doing it for a long time. In fact, I bet you there's been times where you've been in the car, maybe you're on if you drive somewhere for work, and you do that commute back and forth day after day after day. There's probably been times after a hard day's work where you've gotten in your car and you're just kind of zoning out, and you're just driving home, and you pull into your driveway, and then you think about, oh my gosh, I don't even have a clue about that drive. Like, you don't even remember the drive, right? Because it's just automatic. Your brain can just automatically bring you home, and you don't even think about it. Okay. And so again, that's where our brains are brilliant. They can get us home, and we don't even really have to think about it. So that's a beautiful thing. Now, with that said, there are certain things that happen, okay, that can get us into trouble. And that's kind of going to be where we sort of transition, because what happens is our brains also are really good at filling in the blanks automatically, quickly, and silently. Okay. You ever see those things on, like, your favorite social media, Facebook or whatever it is, and you'll see sometimes they'll have like a big paragraph, and there's a bunch of like letters missing from all these words and all that, but you don't have any problem reading it, do you? Right? It's because your brain can do it. It recognizes that pattern of there's enough letters in there that their brain has no problem, quickly and automatically filling in the missing letters. Okay. But what happens is we come up to a point in time when we're dealing with something where we hit a wall. I like to use the analogy. Imagine you're standing outside in the dark, you're camping or something like that, and you've got, I would say your flashlight, but nowadays you got your iPhone, right? And you just turn the flashlight on in your iPhone, and you're standing there and you're trying to see where you're going. Well, guess what? The light only goes so far, right? And after that, you can't see beyond the light. Well, what we call that, where we can't see beyond the light, we would call that our knowledge threshold, okay, our current knowledge threshold. And so what do you have to do in order to see further besides get a bigger light? Well, you have to take a step forward, right? When you take one step forward, now your light moves forward a little bit. Now we see a little bit more. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on when our adult brains are trying to automatically figure things out. We're starting to battle and rub up against this current knowledge threshold. Okay, now on this next slide, I got a test for everybody. Okay, and I need you to really please participate. And in fact, if you don't mind, I know it's kind of a, you know, maybe it's hard on Zoom and nervous and all that kind of stuff, but unmute your microphones right now. And I'm going to flip over to a slide, and I want you to just kind of just, you don't have to yell it or anything, but I want you to just tell me, what do you see? Okay. The first thing that you see, I just want you to blurt it out. Okay. You might have to say it a couple times if people are, you know, all talking at the same time. Okay. So go ahead, get your mics unmuted. Okay. I'm going to flip it over here. 1, 2, 3. What do you see?
Old woman.
Old lady.
Old lady.
Old woman.
Young lady.
Young woman.
What? Well, young and an old. It can't be a young and an old. What do we see?
A young woman.
A young woman. Okay. What do you see?
Old woman.
Woman.
Woman looking the other way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've looked at this picture so many times that I can see two things. What do you see, Hillary?
I'm the same as you. I see both, but initially when I look at this picture, I see the old woman.
Okay. So if you don't see the young lady, okay, this is her eyelashes. This is her chin. This is her little necklace thing. Okay. That's, I guess, was that her ear and a weird earring or something? Okay. Right. So that's the young lady. Does everybody see the young lady now? If you saw the old, okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you to see the older lady, maybe who's not so attractive, this is her left eye, I guess, right? This is her mouth kind of thing. This is maybe a pretty large nose. Okay. So that's the older lady. So the point of the matter is we can two different people can look at the exact same thing and your brain tells you something radically different, right? And so one of the sayings that we have within the Kata community, in fact, I used to have, I have a sticker. It's right on my, well, you can't see it. My camera's over here. It says, "Don't be so sure." Okay. That's kind of a mantra of the Kata movement. It's don't be so sure that you have the right answer, because you might not, right? And so this is a really a great exercise to sort of demonstrate that point. Again, we're great. Our brains are great at filling in patterns. I've already talked about that one. So like for this one, what does that say? Obviously, what does it say?
Jumping to conclusions.
Conclusions, yeah.
Right. Does anybody think it says anything else besides jumping to conclusions? Except for Leanne, who probably knows what's about to happen. See, it doesn't. All right. It doesn't. So don't be so sure. Okay. That's if you take anything away from this presentation, please just take away that saying, don't be so sure. Okay. We need to test. We need to experiment our way forward. That's really what we're doing. We're testing and we're experimenting our way forward. So what you might do, a good Kata practitioner might look at that and say, you know what? I predicted it probably says jumping to conclusion. And, you know, I'm not 100% sure. We got to run the experiment to make sure. But yeah, I think it does say jumping to conclusion. And I make a prediction, right, of whether I'm right or wrong. And then we run the experiment. And then we say, whoa. Okay. And then, you know, my prediction didn't turn out, but guess what? I learned that, wow, you can use letters in certain ways to really trick your mind into thinking one thing when it's completely something different, right? So there's learning that can happen when we run these experiments. Okay. Now, the reason that just jumping to conclusions or being sure instead of not always don't be so sure is that in continuous improvement in particular, or in the quality profession as well, it's very problematic and can get you into big trouble. Okay. So how many times have you been in a meeting and you're sitting around with some colleagues, and maybe a couple of them aren't your favorite people in the world, okay? And you have this problem that you are all discussing, and then someone is so, saying, well, this is what we got to do. This is how we fix it. And another person says, no, that's not right. This is what we got to do. And I'm like, okay, well, you think we got to do that? You think we got to do that? And then you spend an hour or more debating on who's got the right answer. Has anybody ever experienced that? Okay. I'm sure, hopefully everybody's head's nodding yes. We've all experienced that. Well, I contend that is the biggest waste of time in the entire world, because really what we should be debating is, hey, Hillary, that's an interesting hypothesis that you have there. How could we test it? And then, oh, Glenn, that's a really interesting idea. How could we test that?
Right.
And so what we should be debating in these meetings isn't who's right, who's got the right answer. It's what's the first experiment that we all agree that we're going to run. Debate that, okay? And then when you settle on one, then we're going to explain the process, but you'll make a prediction. Everybody will make a prediction, or whoever's going to lead that experiment will make a prediction, and then we're going to play it out and then see what actually happens and what we learned. Okay, so that's what we're really trying to do here. Don't be so sure. Yeah.
Question. So in many cases, right, we can always go through some amount of physical analysis to see if the hypothesis is even right or not, if it's making physical sense, or whether it meets our standard, understanding of the way things work in the process or any of the areas. So do we really need to do experiments all the time, or can we just make a very educated guess based on prior experience?
No, don't. So your educated guess should come into play to design your experiment. Because no matter what, no matter how educated we are, there might be times to where you're wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're so sure that you're right, now your education and your experience should definitely be leveraged, but I would contend it's leveraged in the form of designing a solid experiment. Now, especially if you can test it quickly, right? This doesn't have to drag out for months and weeks at a time. Hopefully it's something that we can go and test, and we can test relatively quickly. Okay. So we can get immediate feedback. So what we're really trying to do here is, if you're familiar with PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or even DMAIC, something like that, we're trying to turn those wheels quicker and faster. Okay. But no, to your point, I mean, for sure, we're not throwing out our experience or our knowledge or our wisdom, whatever you want to call it. In fact, we're leveraging it like never before, but we're trying to leverage it in a way that helps us to learn and learn quickly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great question.
Having a really good physical computer model can really save time in doing the checking.
For sure. Well, you could even do things like in statistical world, you could do like Monte Carlo simulations, right? When we get into, some more advanced, DOEs and things like that, where if you have a good, I mean, I get all geeked out on statistics here, but if you have a good transfer equation, or a good regression equation, you can load that into Monte Carlo simulation and run it 1,000,000 times, right? And that's beautiful, so long as you are extremely confident that your transfer equation is accurate. And the only way that you're going to do that is that you will have tested it, right? You will have tested it, and you would have formed really strong evidence that this is a good transfer equation. Then with the Monte Carlo simulation and that more advanced analysis for sure can come in. But I would contend that even Monte Carlo simulation is a form of experimentation, right? It's a form of it. Now, it's still not actually producing a widget or, whatever it is that you're doing, but it's giving you some really good insight. And it could potentially save you a lot of money and make the real experiments to where you really go do something far more efficient. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah. Okay. Good questions. Thank you. So anyhow, all this is leading us to what we call scientific thinking. Now, within the Kata community, scientific thinking, Toyota Kata sort of synonymous with one another. Okay. Toyota Kata is just a framework that Mike Rother and his research team, they coined, so he could write the book basically. And Kata, if you're familiar with say martial arts, it just means routine. Okay. So like if any of you practice martial arts or your kids did, they may have learned like a kata, right? And it's like a series of movements that they learn to help them sort of understand, different ways of defending themselves or whatever it might be. Okay. And so it's a dance, it's a routine. That's what a kata is. Okay. But scientific thinking is really what we're doing when we practice the Toyota Kata. So a definition, there's many different ways of looking about it, but one way of explaining it is scientific thinking is a process of deliberately engaging the reality with the intent of learning. And some of the key words there are deliberately. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. We're going to talk about deliberate practice. Okay, but you'll also see that learning is highlighted there. Okay, so we're deliberately engaging the reality around us with the intent or the hope or the purpose of learning. Okay, and so a nice little graphic that you see there at the bottom is that we have an area, an idea of where we want to be. Okay, we want to be somewhere within the scientific thinking framework. We might call that the challenge. Okay, where we want to be, and then we know where we are now. You could call that your current condition. Okay, and then in between, we've got obstacles and it's unclear territory. And so what we're doing with scientific thinking is we are trying to learn our way through that gray zone to get to that end zone there, where we want to be. Okay. Another way of looking at it, it's a continuous comparison. Scientific thinking is, it's a continuous comparison between what we predict will happen next, seeing what actually happens, adjusting our understanding and actions based on what we learn from the difference. So look at this on the left. We make a prediction, and that's what you'll learn when you start to learn and practice Kata, is that we're constantly making predictions. And you think, why do you make predictions? Well, the reason we make predictions is because when we actually then play the experiment out, or we take the action, whatever it is that we were planning to do, we're gonna see what actually happened. Well, if you see what actually happened and you compare that now to what you thought was going to happen, that's when you have deep, deep learning. But if you don't make a prediction, and I would contend most traditional problem solvers don't. They don't make predictions. They just make a plan and then they go do it. Well, and that's better than nothing. At least you did something. But I would say once you make a plan, make a prediction, write it down on paper. What do you think is going to happen? And don't be upset if what you thought was going to happen didn't actually happen. There's no problem with that. There's no harm with that. Okay, because guess what? All we care about is learning. So sometimes we might learn that, yeah, our prediction was spot on. Okay, cool. And sometimes we learn, wow, our prediction was way off. Look, but in both cases, you've learned, and so you've won. Okay, I think that's another reason that the Kata community is so passionate, is because when you take on this way of thinking and working, it's a huge stress relief when you're problem solving, because you don't have to have that pressure of being right all the time. You just have to have that courage to experiment and learn, right? So if anything, it teaches you humility as well, which is a great virtue, right? To be humble as we're going about our work of improvement. Okay. So the thing about it is it's not natural. Okay. And I would contend it's really hard, and Leanne probably could contend with that as well, especially when you first start doing it. It's kind of clunky. We've got, I don't have any on my desk here, but we've got cards that we use when we're first learning how to do this, and we're reading from these cards, trying to almost like rote memorization, working your way through it. So it's kind of clunky in the beginning, but eventually you hit this groove. And then next thing you know, like I've got some really good friends within the Kata community, and we'll be talking. And then my friend Mike Lombard, who's one of the original pioneers as well in Kata, he'll say, man, we need a KTS. And you know what KTS means? We need to Kata that. I won't swear, but SHIT. We need a KTS. We need to Kata that, you know? So that's the beautiful thing about it, is once you do it a little bit, it'll just become your default way of looking at everything. Okay. And so you can practice it and you can get really good at it. And then when you do, I promise you're going to be hooked. Okay. Here's another one. You guys are all quality professionals, so you're super good at math, right? So what's the next number in the sequence? Anyone?
I hope it's 14, but now I'm not so sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for not being so sure.
I
So
second
yeah, because the answer was actually 2, right? See, you're already learning, Hillary. You're the star student, man. I love it. So Hillary made a prediction. She was brave. She made a prediction. She said, I think it's going to be 14. But she was also smart and said, but I don't know. We got to run the experiment, because what actually happened? 2. So what could that mean? If you go back to this, what could that mean in this, if this process was a process? What would the next number presumably be? Possibly
4.
4. And so
4.
it could be that it repeats 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. What would we need to do to confirm that? Run a few experiments, right? Run it a few times out. Okay. Run it a few times out. Okay. So this is just an example. That point there, that 12, that was our threshold of knowledge. That was at the point to where we might have some ideas. Hillary had some ideas, and she was willing to put it out there as a prediction, but she wasn't for sure. All right, she wasn't for sure. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, we're trying to identify our threshold of knowledge and then figure out how can we experiment our way forward to understand what the truth really is of that process. Okay, so within Toyota Kata, there's 2 different Kata. Again, Kata is routine, dance, something like that. Okay, so there's the improvement Kata and there's the coaching Kata, and we're going to just dip our toe into both of them in this presentation. I'll give you some ideas, and I got all of Mike's books back here on my bookshelf. Well, you can't see it because my fake Zoom background, but I'll pull some books out and give you some recommendations. And I've interviewed Mike on our podcast, so I can free podcast. I'll send Hillary or somebody that link, and you guys can all learn more after this. But you'll know enough to be dangerous by the end of this presentation. Okay, so with the improvement Kata, what we're trying to do is we're trying to model this whole scientific thinking pattern. Okay, now we'll often talk about a coach and a learner within a sort of a Kata framework. Okay, and the learner is going to practice the improvement Kata, and the coach, big surprise, is going to practice the coaching Kata. Okay, now here's the thing, and you know, again, if you're into statistics, we all know that models, again, we talked about, you know, all that geeky regression and transfer equations and all that. Models, you know, are good, and that could be very useful, but, you know, they don't necessarily teach skill. Okay, so you've got to practice, right? So with the improvement Kata, or the practice pattern number 1, as we sometimes call it, there's 4 steps. Okay, we're going to understand the direction or challenge. That's step 1. 1C, if you want to think of it that way, 1C. We're going to grasp the current condition, the second step, 2C. There's 2 C's, current condition, get it? Okay. Third step is we're going to establish the target condition, TC, okay? And then the 4th step is we're going to experiment against these obstacles towards the target condition. Okay, let's dig into each one a little bit more. So when we do that first step, 1C, the direction or challenge, this is where we're trying to ask them very fundamental questions. What problem am I trying to solve? What am I trying to learn here? Okay, Now, within the Kata framework, when we really get into this and companies get into this, the leadership of the organization might set the direction. They might set the challenge. They might say, hey, Hillary, we want you to do such and such and such, in 9 months from now. And typically a challenge is, my friend Mark Rosenthal always says that, well, when you get a good challenge, it should make you suck air through your teeth like, ooh, that's kind of tough, but it's not impossible. Okay. So that's a good challenge. If you suck air through your teeth a little bit, but then you kind of let your breath out and be like, all right, we can do that. Okay. So that's what we're doing with the first one, direction or challenge. Then 2C, current condition. What do I know today? Okay. So this is where by the way, this second step is probably one of the hardest. Okay. Because believe it or not, many times we really have no clue how our processes or what's even going on. Okay. So what do I know? What do I not know? And what is my threshold of knowledge? Okay. Those are the things that we're looking for here in this second step. Okay. TC, target condition. This is where the magic happens. And this is where I would contend Toyota Kata is radically different than just about any other sort of thinking system out there. You can see what typically happens in, even just in a traditional DMAIC or something like that. We might go out and just say, okay, here's where I want to go. Here's where I am. And, let's just get started and start laboring our way through. Okay. Well, what we're doing with target condition is to say, okay, that's where we want to be long-term, sucking air through my teeth, pretty tough. Here's where I am today. Big gap between the two. Where do we think we can be in a week or two? That gets us a little closer. Okay. And so that's what a target condition is. It's maybe our first step, small step, something that we realistically think we can achieve that gets us a little bit closer. Okay. So we're going to set this target condition. Okay. And then we're going to start experimenting that. Now we're into the fourth step. We're going to experiment against any obstacle that's in our way towards that target condition. All right. Does anybody in the audience, virtual audience, run? Like go outside and run? You do? Who else? I'm always picking on Hillary because she's the only one with her camera on.
This is Joanne. I run.
Okay. Anybody run like a half marathon or marathon, anything like that?
I'm running. Somebody better shoot. What the hell's chasing me?
Okay. All right. Well, let's just say, Hillary, I bet you could run pretty good. So let me just pick on Hillary. Hillary, I'm going to give you a challenge. 1C. You're going to run a marathon, 26.2 miles. And you know what? I'm going to give you 6 months to train. Okay. Is that fair? 6 months. Okay. You're in Arizona, so you can run year round. So it's not a problem, right? It's not, not like you're in Massachusetts or something, right? Okay. All right. So now I won't ask you, okay, how far you can run today for your current condition, but I'm going to make a funny joke here. And I'm just going to say that Hillary can run about a mile. And then unfortunately, she throws up. She runs a mile and then she throws up. So guess what? I'm asking her to run 26.2 miles in 6 months, and she can run a mile and then throws up. We got a pretty huge gap, don't we? Now, that's almost overwhelming to think about, right? Almost overwhelming. And so the next day you go out and you start running again, and you even have a worse day because you overtrained the day before and you don't even make it a mile. And you're like, how the heck? It's hopeless. Right. And then how many times does that happen? We have this huge goal and we're so far away and we just get so defeated and so frustrated. And guess what? Well, maybe next year, maybe next year. So a better way is now we know where we got to go, 26.2 miles. We know where we are. We run a mile and we throw up. And then we say, hey, how about we set a target condition? How about, hey, Hillary, do you think that if we kind of sat down and kind of figured out what was going on with your running and all the rest of it, that let's set a goal to where, you can run a mile without throwing up, with no issue, or maybe a mile and a half, something like that. Just jog and let's really set that up. well, okay, I think I can. Let's aim for a week or two from now. And so also I say, well, hey, what kind of shoes do you have? You got good shoes? And how about your diet? Are you eating good? You getting enough sleep? And, you start going through all these things, these obstacles that might be in your way towards that short-term target condition. And we start chipping away at these obstacles. And next thing you know, you look up and Hillary's hit her first target condition, 1.5 miles, no problem, no more throwing up. Now she ratchets it up to 3 miles and so forth. And now she's at 15 miles. And we look back at and we laugh about, oh, remember we didn't even have shoes and, you were eating Twinkies all day, and now we clean up your diet. But now we have a whole new set of obstacles because Hillary is working with a running coach now. And they say that she goes, well, and I think I hit that 15-mile mark. I think my glycogen stores are completely depleted and, this and that. And now the obstacles are very different, right? Because now she's at 15 miles. And so now we've got different obstacles that we're experimenting against and we're trying to overcome. And next thing you know, you look up and that current condition, that if you look at the blue box there, that current condition circle is now even with the target condition. Okay. And then eventually we get to that challenge. We get to that 26.2 miles. Okay. But all we've done is we've aimed at those short-term target conditions and kept iterating our way forward. Okay. So now you're going to go run a marathon and you report back in 6 months. Okay. All right. So here's the thing. We talked about this a little bit earlier about this whole idea of deliberate practice. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. So, when you're at an ASQ keynote, no matter how great or horrible the presenter is, you're going to learn some information and that's good. And you go to a big lecture in a university or whatever, and the professor's super smart and he's telling you all this stuff. And that's good, right? Don't get me wrong. I mean, you watch a Gemba Academy video, wonderful, thank you, but, and you're learning some good stuff and that's important, but you haven't actually developed any skill yet because you haven't done anything. Right? If all you do is read a book, but you never take action on what you've read, then you didn't actually develop anything. You just put some information in your head. Okay. So this is where this whole idea of deliberate practice comes in. Okay. And one of the most perfect examples of deliberate practice is when a really good musical instrument instructor sits with a person, perhaps it's a young child. And young children are brilliant because their brains are super plastic and they can learn fast, right? And so the teacher is like, okay, Johnny, play this, ding, 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 oh, that's good. No, well, no, quite, and so what happens is you give them a little task, the child plays the thing, and then the teacher gives immediate feedback, immediate, instruction and correction. And, this is deliberate practice. Now, if the child just sits down and plays, that's great. No problem. It's important. They got to play on their own to get good at it. But if that's not deliberate practice by itself, because that's just practice. But when you have that teacher sitting right beside you, giving you feedback, correcting you, that's when it becomes deliberate. Okay. Another example. So one of my daughters has played soccer since she's a little girl. She's playing now in college. So we're super proud of her. And I remember I was her first coach. At the, and she was on the Little Angels, she was about, 6 or 7 years old. And we were playing our big rivals back then. And they were the Pink Panthers. And man, we could never beat the Pink Panthers. And my daughter was she was a little forward, the little kid at the front who scores all the goals, she was real little and fast. And anyhow, we had the Pink Panthers 1-1 late in the second half of this game. I mean, 6, 7-year-old soccer is super important, recreational at that. Okay. And I remember my daughter, Brenna, she's running towards the goal. And this girl comes and wipes her out right in the penalty box. And guess what happens? Well, what happens when do you guys know soccer World Cup, when you get a penalty in the inside the box? What do you get? Who knows? Anybody? Soccer players out there?
Penalty kick.
Yeah, you get a penalty kick. Okay. So basically time was out now. And we are tied 1-1. And if my daughter, Brenna, makes her penalty kick, we win. We finally beat the Pink Panthers. So my daughter, I had the video still. She lines up She's aiming up, and I knew she was going to go to the bottom left corner because she always did, but I couldn't even hardly watch. This is the Pink Panthers. And she winds up and she runs up. She strikes the ball. I hear it. Thunk. It's a good hit. I'm like, oh, yes. I see it slicing to that bottom left penny. And then bing, right off the post. And she didn't make it. And she was devastated. I'll never forget it. She still talks about it to this day. 6-year-old soccer. Anyhow, here's what happened. Here's where I'm going with this deliberate practice. I'll never forget it. We had a little net in our backyard. We got home that day, and I was the coach, so I had a ton of soccer balls in this big bag. She grabs that bag, and she was so upset with herself, poor thing. She goes out to the backyard, and she grabbed her little brother and said, "You come here." And she handed him my cell phone. She didn't have a cell phone at the time. So she handed him a cell phone and she said, "You're going to stand here and record me." And so then what she did, she got like 10 soccer balls and she lined them up and she says, "Okay, I'm going to hit these in the bottom right left corner." Boom, 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 all 10 in the bottom left corner. And she videotaped it. And she went back and she watched. If she missed any, she tried to, was my plant foot wrong? Was my, whatever it was. Then she hit 10 into the bottom right corner. Then she hit 10 in the top right, 10 in the top left. And she carried on like that for about an hour. Okay. All the while, every time she did it, she went back and watched the video. That's an example of deliberate practice. Okay. And so, because what she could have done is she could have just took those balls and put them on the ground and just started whacking them into the net. And again, nothing wrong with that. That's good practice, but it's not deliberate. Okay. So if you take anything also, besides don't be so sure, is when we practice, we want to make sure that we have people there with us, even if they're just colleagues, as a second set of eyes to help us understand how we're doing, giving us feedback. Okay. So that's why deliberate practice is so important. There's some really brilliant books written on just deliberate practice in and of itself, if you guys are interested down the road. Now, all this leads back to brain science. It really does. Okay. It all comes back down to habit formation. We talked about, driving to work and or driving home from work and you don't even remember how you got home. That's because it's a habit, right? You probably don't have to think when you brush your teeth, that sort of thing. Why? Because it's a habit. Okay. And we've got those connections in our brain. Now, if you ever go to Europe and you drive and you're from America, well, guess what? Yeah, it's going to be really difficult. You know why? Because your brain is wired, your neural pathways are wired to drive on a certain side of the road with the steering wheel on a certain side of the car. When you go to Europe, the steering wheel's on the other side and you're on the other side of the road, and it will mess up your brain because we haven't created those neural pathways. Okay. Now, I'm not going to play this video, but I want you to all take a note. If you may have seen it. Have you guys ever seen this video? His name's Dustin. He's got this a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day. And it's brilliant, especially if you're into science and that kind of stuff. Anyhow, in this video, he's got a bicycle that he's wired up to as a backwards bike. So when you turn the steering wheel to the left, the wheel goes to the right. And when you turn the wheel to the right, the wheel or the steering wheel to the right, the wheel goes to the left. And you can't ride one. I'll tell you right now, if you got on one, you cannot ride it. Okay. And so what Dustin did is he went at it and he trained himself to be able to ride it. And this video is all about, how hard it is for your brain to learn new ways of doing things. Okay. And eventually he talks about it, I won't spoil, I'll spoil it. He figures it out. He can write it in the end, but it's a brilliant video. I would really encourage you to go watch it. Just backwards bike, Smarter Every Day. And you'll see this whole idea about how our brains work and how difficult it is to do things differently than what we're used to. Okay, so that's a lot about the improvement kata. Now let's briefly touch on the second practice pattern, which is the coaching kata. Okay, again, for it to be deliberate practice, the learner must have a coach there along with them. It doesn't mean that they're with them every second of the day, but it just means that on a periodic basis, you're going to check back with your coach and you're going to navigate your way through this journey or through this problem solving exercise, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Okay, so with the coaching kata, all this is, again, kata means routine, dance. It's a dance or a routine to help the learner through the improvement kata. Okay, so that's all it is. The coach is helping the learner practice the improvement kata. Okay, and so there's a standardized way, and there's a series of questions. And we're going to show you some of the questions here in a little bit on, again, in the beginning, you sort of just use the questions as they originally designed, but eventually, you'll make them your own and you read them exactly the same way. So the reason that we don't go about this alone without a coach is because, as we know, we proved it earlier, it's super easy to jump to conclusions. Okay. And so that's why we want to always have others with us, have a coach with us. In fact, again, don't put a lot of pressure on the whole coach learner thing. In the Kata community, we all say, have a coach, be a coach, So like Hillary and I could team up, and she could be working through some initiative and I'll play the coach. And then all of a sudden I'm going to say, okay, now let's go over to my area where I'm working on some stuff, and she could play the coach. Okay. So really you can have a coach, be a coach. That's the best way. The best coaches have also been learners, and the best learners have also been coaches, right? So you go back and forth that way. Okay. So the other thing the coach is doing is we have this thing called this improvement corridor. Okay. And so again, we're trying to navigate our way from where we are now, the current condition, to that next target condition, to that challenge, maybe a long-term vision. Okay. But there's all these shiny objects, squirrel, sometimes you'll say, like you're really focused and all of a sudden squirrel runs by and you're distracted. Okay. So the coach is there to help you ignore the squirrels in the world and stay focused on what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. Now, a few things for the coach to think about as they're trying to help their learner. Okay. To learn any skill, there's at least these 4 things that are very helpful. Okay. Practicing every day. Okay. Just a little bit every day. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2, having some routine or a structured routine is very important. And that's why we do have this framework. On the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of what a Kata card might look like. Okay. So these routines are important. Then we need that feedback from our coach. That's the 3rd step. Okay. And then finally, you get enthusiasm, right? Because, if you think about, if you get into like human motivation and that sort of thing, and, a gentleman named Dan Pink wrote a really good book called Drive, What Motivates People. And he talks about the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Well, all of that is at play here, because when you're doing this the correct way, what you're building intrinsic motivation in your learner, because the learner is learning. They're getting better at what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And I would argue that it almost gets addicting in a good way. Like you can get addicted to trying to make things better and seeing what you can learn next. Okay. And that's when you get to that point, oh, look out, because there's really nothing that you can't accomplish. Okay. Now, here's what these are obviously Gemba Academy branded cards, but there's we'll make sure that you all get a website. If you go to Google and you just Google Toyota Kata, there's a University of Michigan website that's going to probably be towards the top. And that's Mike Rother's website. And he's got a ton of free information, including Kata card templates that you can download. I mean, you can buy them as well from them or whatever. We have a million. I'll mail you some if you want some, just email me. And we've got some that we can send you as well. But these are the 5 questions that the coach is going to start with. What is your target condition to the learner? So imagine they're standing at this big board where they might have some different papers describing all the stuff they're working on. Okay, we call it a Kata storyboard. So what's your target condition, Mr. or Mrs. Learner? Oh, okay. Well, what's your actual condition now? Okay. And then at that point, they're going to tell you where they are now. Then you're going to flip the card over. So I'm going to do that by advancing the slide. Okay. And then on the opposite side of the card, it's going to say, okay, well, what did you plan as your last step in your last experiment? And they'll say, well, I planned this. Oh, what did you think was going to happen? What did you expect? Okay, cool. Well, what actually happened? Well, this happened. Ah, well, what did you learn? Oh, well, I learned this. Okay. Then you flip the card back over. and you say, okay, well, what obstacles do you think are preventing you from reaching the target condition now? And which one are you addressing? Notice one, we want to stay focused down that corridor. What one thing do you want to work on? All right, cool. That's a good obstacle. What's your next step? And what do you think's going to happen? What do you expect? And then finally, all right, cool. Well, how quickly can we go and see what we have learned from taking that step? The key word is we, because guess what? The coach doesn't know either. The coach doesn't know what's going to happen either. So we're both learning, the coach and the learner. Okay. And so that's kind of that's the kata, if you will. That's the framework that you start with. Okay. And again, when you're first learning to practice this, we do encourage you to kind of use the card as a guideline. But, 3 years later, you probably won't use the card. I bet you if Leanne is leading you through and she's coaching you up, she's not going to say these questions the exact same way. And that's fine. But the general emphasis is going to be the exact same thing that's on these cards. Okay. All right. That was like a fire hose coming at you on the improvement kata and the coaching kata. And I have no idea how we're even doing on time. So what questions do you have?
We're doing extremely well on time. So ask whichever questions you would like to ask or how many you'd like to ask. We've got plenty of time left.
Okay.
Actually, I have one, Ron.
Okay.
Was there an initial event that got you interested in kata?
Yeah, I kind of shared this in the little breakout rooms. I'll do it here for everybody else. When Mike and Mike Rother's I consider a good friend, and I didn't share with everybody. Like if you're familiar with Mike, he wrote. Well, let's see. Out here. Yeah. So I don't know if my camera will pick it up. Probably. It's called Learning to See, right? So this is like the original sort of book on value stream mapping. So Mike and this guy named John Shook, former Toyota manager, they wrote this book. And oh my gosh, I don't even when they wrote this thing, 2009. So this is it was updated. It was even before then that they wrote this. But this was so Mike and these guys at the Lean Enterprise Institute, lean.org, they're sort of like I wouldn't say they weren't the original people that brought Lean over to America, but they really helped popularize it. This guy named James Womack, he's the guy he coined the term Lean. And anyhow, they made all these tools, right? Value stream mapping, 5S, Kanban. And so what happened was we all, me included, we all copied all the Toyota stuff. We read every book Mike and these guys wrote, and we practiced it. But then what happened was Mike and his colleagues even stood back and be like, well, everybody's copied everything Toyota and other companies who practice this kind of stuff, but yet none of us are achieving the same results as them. What are we missing? And so what happened was Mike and this group of researchers went back to Japan, and they also went to spend some time in Germany, and Mike's got some German heritage, and they went to Toyota and they went to some other companies and try to understand what else are they doing. We've copied all the stuff that they do, but there must be some underlying, some hidden things that's going on that we're all missing. And that's when they discovered that these leaders were doing these things like the coaching kata. And so Mike codified it and called it Toyota Kata. And that's when he wrote the first book. It's the red book. It's a big, thick book. And Mike would be the first one to tell you, if you're first trying to learn about Toyota Kata, don't read that book, because he's written several other ones. Now, the Toyota Kata Action Guide, that's or practice guide. I would say it wrong. There
you go, Ron. That's right. It's the red book, and he doesn't recommend it's theory.
Yeah, he does not recommend it. And yeah, I'll pull the ones, I've got them all here. The ones that he recommends, and we can send a list out. But long story short, when Mike first came out with this stuff, I thought, oh, good for Mike. He'll sell 1 million books, do a lot of talks, make a lot of money. And I probably had some intellectual jealousy or whatever, kind of stuff. And so I didn't really practice it at first. And then we had a lot of customers calling us saying, hey, you got any like calling Gemba Academy, said, you got any Toyota Kata stuff? And we're like, no, well, it's just PDCA, you don't really need Kata, but they just kept coming. So, a good business, you got a voice of the customer and all that kind of stuff. Right. And so we're like, we got to really look into this, and we don't ever produce content if we don't practice it first. And so I read everything I could, and I went to some workshops and different stuff. And then I said, we got to start practicing this. And interestingly enough, one of the first groups at Gemba Academy to practice it was our sales team. Sounds crazy, but what they did is they ended up taking the framework of scientific thinking and applying it to people who were calling up saying, hey, what do you guys got going on at Gemba Academy? Maybe I want to buy your product. And so our salespeople would be like, if you call them today, you'll be like, you're doing Kata, aren't you? And they'll be like, well, where do you want to be? Challenge, right? Well, where are you now? And okay, well, where do you think you could be in, in a month or two? And then if Gemba Academy can help them, then they'll say, here's how we can help you get where you want to be. So it's this consultative sale. Okay. And so then we started practicing it, like all of our certifications, our green belt, black belt, master black belt, lean practitioner, all the certifications we offer. All of our coaches use the coaching kata. Even if we're working with some black belt or some DMAIC project, doesn't matter. We're still using that framework, that coaching kata framework, to navigate our way through and helping that black belt get through it. And what we found is that when you marry like scientific thinking with things like DMAIC or DMADV, or it doesn't even matter, it's like jet fuel, it's like jet fuel. And so it's a thinking. So it doesn't matter what methodology you use, whether it's DMAIC, PDCA, again, it doesn't matter. It's this thinking and this iterating, this learning your way forward. That's where the magic happens. And so yeah, I'm a massive believer. I would argue to say that it is the single most important thing a continuous improvement practitioner could know. And I'm not bashful about saying that. It's the single most important thing anybody listening on this virtual webinar right now could learn, is how to think scientifically. I don't care what your job is, because it'll transform the way that it goes, and you'll become much better than you are today if you aren't already thinking this way. Leanne, can I get an amen?
That's right. With all the things that we're expected to like solve and stuff. I mean, this cuts through. It actually enhances any kind of program you got going on. I've worked with companies that you would be shocked that their lean manufacturing or lean principles had just kind of become stagnant. Like those Kaizen events, you can get a list of things that need to happen, and they just kind of celebrate anniversaries of not getting done.
Yeah.
And we come in and it's like it lights the program back up.
Yep.
Like a shot in the arm.
Yep.
So it's a positive. So highly recommend this concept. And yeah.
How long have the two of you been using it?
Oh, I mean, we've been using it for, this is the book. This is the best one.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The Toyota Kata practice guide. I always call it action guide for some reason, but yeah, that's the one. So yeah, we've been practicing it actively at Gemba Academy for probably 6 years, maybe something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Ron. This is Nee from the Boston, Massachusetts area. Quick question. How would you compare the improvement kata to the A3 problem solving? Particularly
great question.
Particularly the
Great
7-step A3 problem solving, which I have used extensively as a black belt.
Great question. Matter of fact, I got homework for you. I want you to go Google or YouTube it. There's a talk that Mike Rother gave. I'll find it as well. And I got a lot of notes here to remember to send somebody, but he actually does he answers this question of can Kata and A3 play nicely together? And so the thing about A3s is there's a little misunderstanding in that with an A3, all an A3 is a piece of paper the size about, A3 size piece of paper that helps us tell a story. Now we sometimes say, well, there's a framework behind it, but there's really not. Sometimes there's 7 questions, sometimes there's 8 questions, sometimes there's, a block here, a block there. And so it's really a way to help us think our way through and tell our story. And so what you can do is you can use that A3 and that framework behind the A3, and then use Kata to sort of help yourself work your way through that. In particular, when you get to the action part, the top right part of your A3, where you're working through like some things that you're trying to figure out, you use Kata or scientific thinking to experiment your way forward through that action plan. So for sure, they are very complementary tools. Okay. Now, within formal Toyota Kata practice, you would have this big, what we call a Kata storyboard. And it's typically like, we've got some in our training room over here. I probably should have wheeled one over here. And we put them on big rolling whiteboards. And so then you stick pieces of paper on them. One piece of paper lists all of your obstacles that you're working on. One piece of paper has all your PDCA experiments that you're planning, and another piece of paper summarizes your current condition, that sort of thing. And so we might not use an A3 in formal Kata kind of framework, because we're going to have a lot more information on this board than we could fit on an A3. But we could easily take an A3 and summarize the whole thing. If we're going to a report out, then you'll see that. You'll see it. Kata people will take and they'll summarize where they're at, so they can, because they can't necessarily wheel their whole big whiteboard into the boardroom, but they can bring their A3 to summarize where they're at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times within our continuous improvement world, you'll get these camps, and I love all of it. I'm 6 Sigma guy. I'm a lean guy. I'm theory constraints. I love it all, And, but you'll get people who'll be like, they're so like, they're like, you can't do Kata, you do A3, or 6 Sigma people will come after the lean people, and the lean people will go after the 6 Sigma people. And it's like, oh my gosh, you people, stop it. We're all trying to do the same thing, make things better, just learn it all, right? And then figure out how, what's appropriate for the situation that you're in. So what else?
Have any other questions for Ron this evening?
I'm Ricardo. Well, maybe just kind of a question regarding of the process itself. I would pretty much to know what behaviors should be promoted on the process between the coach and the learner, because sometimes we have our own moods or our own kind of goals, and we sometimes try to lead the other person towards those.
Yeah. So yeah, good question. Behavior. So I mentioned it earlier, humility is a huge part of this, being super, super humble. It doesn't mean that you're weak or, uncertain or anything like that. It just means that, we're willing to step out and try things to see what happens, and so being willing to be, I won't use, maybe vulnerable is too strong of a word. You don't have to be vulnerable necessarily, but you got to be open to new things and new ways of thinking. So if you're rigid and you're really set in your ways, it's going to be really tough for you to thrive in this scientific thinking. Okay. So you got to be willing to experiment, and you got to be willing to change your mind, because we've all got bias. Right? Strong bias. We've all got confirmation bias, right? So if you like a particular sports team, what do? You go to that website that loves that sports team, right? Or if you lean one direction in politics, what do? You go read the website that leans that same way, right? So we're constantly seeking our own confirmation bias, right? And that's deadly when it comes to continuous improvement. Okay, so if you have bias, and we all do, when we're entering into some sort of problem solving exercise, you got to really recognize, I got bias, I know it. I got bias. I got ideas. Okay. But I'm also kind of like Hillary was earlier on the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I'm willing to, I might be wrong. Okay. So you've got to be able to say, I might be wrong, but here's what I think. And here's what I'd like to test. Okay. So if you have that curiosity, maybe is another way, be curious, like genuinely curious. And so like when you're talking to other people, you know, like, especially as a coach, just be quiet, be quiet and listen to your learner, you know, and then really listen, and don't listen in a way like, and I'm bad at this a lot too. I mean, I'm constantly a work in process myself, but you know, when you're listening to somebody and you're just waiting for a pause so you can jump in, right, and say what you want to say. And the fact that you're waiting for that pause, you're no longer listening, you know? And so that's another thing for a coach is you really do have to, you know, we got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We use them in that proportion, right? Talk a lot less than you listen, especially as a coach. So yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the behaviors. Leanne, do you have any other ideas on behaviors?
I think that the biggest thing is you have to learn to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's super uncomfortable for engineers and technical people, because we're all paid to have the right answer and have that right answer now.
Yeah.
And what this really forces you to do is you need to confirm the things you do know.
Yeah.
And regardless, you're going to learn something. You're either going to confirm it or you're going to be really wrong. Regardless, like I said, you've learned something new that you can now apply it to the next experiment that you're going to take. But lots of times we don't admit that we don't know something.
Yeah.
And I always use the analogy of football, of, you know, those guys, those football players get out and they practice every day but Tuesday, but they don't really know what's actually going to happen until they run the play in an actual game situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they learn something which helps them decide what next play they're going to play.
Yeah, exactly. Great analogy.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Ron, I'm posting my email address into the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Here's the chat. Okay. Got it. Okay. I'm going to send you a bunch of links. I'll do it before I go home. Here. Perfect. Got it, Hillary. Thank you. And by the way, I'll put my email in here. Everybody's welcome to any questions or anything. Please reach out. It's pretty easy to remember. Ron@gambaacademy.com. So, yeah, so please email me if you have any questions or any thoughts or, you know, anything like that. Happy to help you. Wow, we have more people come on. Oh, you're muted, Hillary. You're muted, Hillary.
Yes, what I was saying is we had 42 people at our most populated point. So you had quite a few people on the call.
Great.
And I think I know what happened to your introduction slides. So let me try and share those for you guys.
Oh my gosh, you don't have to do.
Well, I have other slides too.
Oh, okay.
Let me see, share screen.
You're welcome, Bill. Thank you. Joanne.
So let's go down. Oops, not what I wanted to do. There you are. So there are Ron's credentials. He has been doing this for quite a while. Just for those of you that are interested, and you did receive our newsletter too with all of this information, just so you had kind of a background on what he'd be talking about this evening. And I do apologize for not having these prior to your presentation.
And I sent somebody the slides as well. So present in like a PDF format. So I
Okay.
guess it's somewhere for you guys to download somewhere. I don't know.
Okay, perfect. And I will get that out to all of the meeting participants tonight as well.
Yeah.
Just a few more wrap-up comments for the group. We have several things planned, as I mentioned earlier, for the 2023 program schedule. We're trying to do 8 hybrid in-person and virtual meetings, 2 per quarter with a guest speaker, and then 4 in-person only meetings with a guest speaker, and that'll be 1 per quarter. And that, at this point, again, is March, June, September, and then December. And then we're hoping to do at least 1 tour in person, which we kind of went over this evening, and one annual holiday networking event in December. And then our next meeting, we will be having a presenter discuss using a free app to resolve commonplace performance reporting and process improvement statement issues. We'll be welcoming Forrest Brayfogle, who is an expert on that. And if all of you could please respond to this survey that you will be receiving. We do appreciate the feedback from that, as it helps us plan future events for you as well as future presenters. You can find the ASQ Phoenix section on various social media sites, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So if you are looking for something to do with the Phoenix section or information that I shared with you earlier regarding a job board, please look at these particular places. Do we have any final thoughts or comments for Ron or for anyone in the ASQ senior leadership team before we head out this evening? All right. Well, Ron, I think.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
No, she froze up. Yeah, thank you, Ron. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for your help
Very
too,
beneficial
Leanne.
and will be in the future.
All right. Okay. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank
I'll
you so
see you
much.
guys later.
Great
Have
job.
a
Thank
wonderful
you.
evening.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.